A free motion quilting foot allows you to move the fabric in all different directions, but a walking foot works with the feed dogs on your machine to pull the fabric through, making it a little easier. So my foot right here is my favorite because it has a nice clear open area so I can see where I'm going, which is nice, but your walking foot might be more narrow, it might be wider, it doesn't matter, just use the one that you like. So here's a few tips to get you started. Now when you get started, the first thing I'm going to do is take a moment and make sure that those teeth are cleaned out. It's using this mechanism to pull that fabric through, and if there's fuzzies in there, it's not going to grab it as much as it should. When you go to put it on your sewing machine, the thing to remember is there's usually a mechanism that clicks into some part of your machine. On my particular foot, it comes around the back, and that's what helps make that walking motion. But on some feet, like this, that fork actually hooks onto the front of the bar to create that. So check your manual, make sure you're installing it correctly. Trust me, there's nothing worse than quilting through half a quilt realizing that it's not actually walking. So the next thing I'm going to do is lengthen the stitch length on my machine. I like to use a 2.5 to 3 millimeter stitch length because since we're going through so many layers, it just allows it to go a little bit further. Now, let's get to quilting. So you can use your walking foot to make all sorts of designs. First and foremost, straight lines. That's kind of what it does. So as I'm quilting, it's just gonna pull that whole thing through. So my only job is to really give it a guide or make sure it's going the right direction I want it to go. So when you're picking out those straight line designs, make sure it's not something that turns too much because that's a lot of repositioning the quilt. But if you want to add a few little turns, you definitely can. I have my needle in the down position, so when I stop, it stops down. I can just lift my foot and reposition the quilt in the direction I want to go. So if I want to do some diagonal lines, all I have to do is turn and continue on. This is especially helpful if you're working on a large quilt and you don't want to have to wrestle the whole thing underneath. And here I'm just going to go a couple different directions. And maybe I'll just go back to my straight lines. The nice thing about this is those feed dogs are doing most of the work. I'm just having fun quilting those straight kind of lines. Now here I'm just quilting on a small sandwich so you can see what's going on, but if I were working on an actual quilt, I'm going to use the piecing as a guide to help keep it on track. Or I might mark some lines, really whatever it does to help me see where I'm going. Once I quilt one line of the design, I'm just going to cut thread and start over again. But I'm going to use the foot of the machine to help keep that spacing consistent. And then now I just have to run the foot along that previously quilted line. That's going to give me about a ½ inch spacing, which I kind of like. And as I get to where I'm going to turn, again, having the needle in the down position, lifting up, and repositioning the quilt. So there you have it. Another thing you can use your walking foot to do is wavy lines. Now even though those feed dogs are pulling it in one direction, I can still maneuver the quilt to give it a little bit of a wavy line. And all I'm gonna do is just start quilting, but as I quilt, just gently go direction to direction. You might be thinking, hey, I already do that when I'm quilting. Perfect, you're way ahead of the rest of us. And you can see, it's not too wavy, but just enough to give it a little bit of movement. Now when I go to add my next line, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to try to make them echo each other. You could, definitely, but I'm going to go for a more organic wavy line, which means I don't really have to think about the previous one. Now don't forget to reposition your hands. One of my biggest bad habits is I'll just keep my hands going. If you need to reposition, just stop, reposition, and then continue on. And I'm just going to do a few more of those and see how it turns out. And there you can see those wavy lines. They're not echoing each other, they're just adding a nice look to it. And if you didn't want it that dense, you could spread those lines out further apart. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is you can actually use the decorative stitches on your machine with your walking foot. So if your machine comes with all those fancy stitches, you can just pick one and that can be your quilting design. Now my machine comes with all these fun stitches, but what I don't want to pick is something really complex because that's just going to take forever to quilt. I'm going to go with something a little bit more simple. How about this nice wavy line right there? So the machine is doing all the work. All I have to do is guide the fabric. Then as it goes, it's going to quilt the design for me. I love that. So whether you use your walking foot to create straight lines, wavy lines, or even decorative stitches, there's a lot of fun ways you can finish your quilts. In fact, Jackie Gehring has a Craftsy class called Creative Quilting with Your Walking Foot, and it's amazing. You can find out information about that and other resources by checking out the description box below.